Welcome to Seeds and Bones, a seasonal podcast on food, land, and belonging. This is a space for slower conversations about the systems that feed us and the ways that we feed them in return. It's where we trace the threads between soil and bodies, animals and culture, and policy and plate. And where we remember that we're not standing outside these systems. We are shaped by them and shaping them every day. I'm Alexia Meller, a former artist academic turned holistic canine nutrition consultant, exploring nourishment as something that begins in the soil and moves through bodies, species, and story. I'm joined by Olivia Shave, a sustainability strategist and former sheep farmer, working to weave food, farming, and climate back into the heart of education and public life. And Daphne Ducross, a food policy scholar and pioneering community food resilience practitioner, tending the connections that help communities to grow stronger, more sovereign food futures. We come together from different paths, practice, policy, and participation, to ask what it means to live, eat, farm, teach, and choose as if we are both ancestors and descendants. We are so glad that you're here. Welcome to our table. Welcome to our very first conversation on Seeds and Bones. This one feels like both an opening and a remembering. It began with three women finding one another across different paths and recognizing a shared pull to bring these conversations into the same space. Because there is something shifting in how we relate to food, to land, to systems, and to ourselves. And in the quiet but growing sense that things don't have to stay as they are. Seeds and Bones is a seasonal podcast guided by the Wheel of the Year, a way of returning to the rhythms of the land and the cycles that shape both our outer and inner worlds. And we're beginning here at the Spring Equinox in the Northern Hemisphere, a moment of balance between light and dark and a threshold into new growth. A time when seeds are planted, when energy begins to rise again, and when what has been held quietly beneath the surface starts to move. In this episode, we begin to unpick some of those threads, not to arrive at answers, but to ask better questions about the stories that we've inherited, about the systems that we've taken for granted, and about what becomes possible when we start to see them not as fixed truths, but as things that can be reimagined. We explore ideas of rewilding and regeneration, not as escape, but as a return, a remembering of participation, of relationship, of our place within the living systems that sustain us, and perhaps most importantly, we come back to the role each of us plays within that. Because this podcast isn't about experts and outsiders, it's about recognizing that we all carry knowledge, intuition, and something of value to offer. And it's an invitation to encourage us to imagine differently. So wherever you're listening from today, whether you're out walking, in the kitchen, in the car, or with your hands in the soil, we invite you to join us in this, to listen, to question, to notice what resonates with you and what stirs within. And perhaps to begin asking, what are the tools that you carry and how might you use them? Let's begin. Hi, ladies. I am so excited to be having this conversation with you this morning and having a cup of tea. And Lucky's joined us. He's that excited as well.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Daphne?
Good. It's kind of exciting to be kicking off. This is the first one, right? This is the launch.
It is the launch.
It feels loaded.
It is. And if you want to, I could give a little bit of a background of why we even wanted to start a podcast, and then we can kind of say who we are. But it was, coming across two other really passionate women, strong women, having important conversations and doing really important work in the world and recognizing we need to bring these perspectives together and we need to create spaces for these bigger conversations and to unpick some of the things that we're seeing floating around, particularly when it comes to how we're relating to food systems or how we're relating to the land and how we're relating to ourselves. And for me, personally tied up into that too is the spiritual component too of how do we understand ourselves from a wider perspective, and the roles that we're here to play. And I just think it's so beautiful that we come from shared and very different backgrounds as well to not have the answers, but probably to come up with many more questions and just create a safe space to start exploring them and tying ourselves back as well to the kind of wheel of the year, getting back in touch with some of these natural cycles and connecting back to ourselves. So I'm just thrilled and excited to be in conversation with you both and just to see what kind of comes up for us through all of this.
I have a confession to make. Olivia said, Daph, do you want to do a podcast? And I was like, yeah, all right, I'll do a podcast. I thought she meant one. And then I was like, oh, we're doing a podcast, many podcasts. Uh, so buckle up. So
Indeed.
yeah, so this is I'm very excited. It feels all of a sudden very serious and grown up to be doing doing a podcast of podcasts. But I agree. And I think the conversations that we've had just in the lead up to this have shown that, my goodness, there is so much to talk about. There's just pinging off one another. And as you say, Alexia, coming from such different places and different life experience, but just there's so much that is rising up right now. And in the world, in our history, that's a reckoning. And I think the connection that we have to land and one another is something that's been becoming more and more alive for me in the last few years and just more in alignment. And as time has gone on over the last few years, just feeling more and more grounded in the choices that I have made that have returned me to land and connection and the work that I do stacking up. It felt like the right thing and that it is the right time. So I'm really excited that we can unpick things together.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I'm feeling the energy this morning, ladies. It's lovely. And welcome to our listeners as well, because I was very fortunate to come across Alexia and write a feature about her and Mystic Dog Mama and how we connect to our ancestry and how we think about circularity really for me, and it's a pivotal part of how I function as a person, but how my business runs, how my thinking occurs in everything I do, and I always come back to circularity. And I'm sorry if I misled you, Daphne, into thinking it was a singular podcast. And yeah, it's just got real. We're doing a whole show. Um, and it's just, I think, having these conversations, planning this, I think I agree, it really demonstrates how broad this and the connectedness of all of these topics that we're going to cover. And like you say, Alexia, we don't have all the answers. However, we're going to have a good go and really, pull some of these narratives apart. And it's going to be incredibly mind-blowing, I think, to a lot of people. I've learned so much along the way. Daphne's learned a lot in her lives, and I love bringing people together, so I'm super excited. So maybe we should just go back to Alexia to start and do a little introduction of who we all are, and then we can dive right in.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Yeah, I think it's also interesting how you and I came into contact with one another, Olivia, because my background is diverse to say the least, but I would say um, in my most recent iterations of myself, I am an artist, a participatory artist and designer by training and by heart. And I did my doctoral research in how we can use these creative ways of thinking and engaging people to connect with really complicated issues like climate change. So, very systems thinking applied to very individual circumstances, individual communities. And one of the big things that came out of that research for me was really looking at the need and the role of empathy and that feeling of connection in order to create change. When we care about something and we see ourselves as part of something, we're much more likely to care for it and to take positive action within that. And after doing that work, again, going back to the kind of spiritual context for me, I had what is often referred to as a dark night of the soul and hit this point of just feeling like this isn't the direction in the way that I'm going. I had been in a very toxic project and started questioning a lot of things for myself. And I needed that time and space that we were talking about just before recording too, to be able to reflect the importance of creating that space to reflect before taking further actions on what was needed for me in my life. And I was invited to go to visit with some friends and family in Mexico for what was supposed to be an extended Christmas break. And I ended up getting stuck there during the pandemic. And an experience I had early in my stay was to go to a local curandero. And for people who are not familiar with what a curandero is in Mexican culture, that's the indigenous healer. And many people still go to that healer as they would the GP, and the curandero is looking at health and healing from every perspective. It's not just about the symptom you may come in. They're looking at your emotional health, your spiritual health, etc. And he asked me why I was there. And I said, I just feel like I need like my chakras unblocking, if I'm to use that kind of language. And he laughed at me and said, you don't need your chakras unblocking. You're a bruja, a witch, an energy worker. And your issue is you've been taking on all of this energy from everything and everyone else and not learning how to master your own and how to ground. And he said, I want you to apprentice with me. And he said, but I also want you to pay attention to dogs and cats that cross your path, particularly at this time, because they are healers for you. And 2 days later, it was announced we were going into hard lockdown. And I shared my contact information with neighbors because where I was, the government was stopping people over 60 from going into the stores. And so I just shared my contact information with, hey, if anybody needs milk or anything like that, I can go and get this for you. And instead, I get a knock at the door. Can you take this puppy? And I thought, you can't make this up. And so I ended up fostering this little one, Lucky, who was named by somebody that doesn't speak English. I didn't name him Lucky. So there were all of these like layers of things. And in terms of where it's brought me now with Mystic Dog Mama, my understanding of what it means to be in a relationship with a healer is at first I thought, oh, puppy coming into your life, like it's all rainbows and unicorns. And there was that. But he also really suffered with several health challenges. And as a pandemic pup, he had behavioral challenges. And I was forced to learn how to feed him. The things I started to unpick with what started off with, truthfully, like, how do I fix this problem for him? I was still coming from that perspective, but it took me down a rabbit hole of seeing these bigger questions around how we have built our food systems, what we are relying on, how we understand our needs versus the needs of our animals, of even understanding where is animal food coming from? How do we understand where the guidelines have even come from for what a dog needs? All of that stuff. And it was like opening an absolute Pandora's box and can of worms that my former academic mind was like, I need to dive into this. So, so that is a big part of what has shaped where I am working as both a holistic canine nutrition and well-being consultant, but also starting to create those opportunities for education and for creating spaces to see how actually I talk about on my other podcast, Mystic Dog Mama, I talk about all the time how dogs are mirrors for us and they are canaries in the coal mine for what is going on for us in terms of our own health and also in terms of the planet's health and our system's health. So when what I get excited about in this context is bringing animals, particularly dogs for me, out from under the table and actually to the table with these really complex conversations around food and systems, and not just nutrition, but nourishment. What does nourishment look like? And how does that then become an invitation and a reflection for us? How do we start to think about our food systems, not just from a human perspective and serving the humans, but a multi-species perspective in which we are all codependent upon one another? So that's where I reached out to Olivia to start some of these conversations.
Lucky me, because it just took me back so much to my grandparents. And it's like, you have that epiphany moment where you think, gee, when did we stop doing that? And you can do that as quite a lot as being an adult, can't you? It's like, when did we stop just, climbing trees or and things like that? And for me, it was very much, you took me back to my childhood when I was learning all about your wonderful work, and how my granddad used to feed his dogs, with peelings, with broth. And I was just fascinated. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm discovering, what food systems look like at the moment through my campaigning. And I just am fascinated, and it's obviously, as I'm on this path with you, discovering how to now, wean my dogs back to that diet, and have been now for several months, and recognizing their gut health and how it's changing. But I love to tell a story. I love writing about people. Storytelling is just my dream, and I spend my life chasing stories. So I was so glad that I could share yours, Alexia. And whether it's in fields and classrooms, on camera or on the page, I'm just chasing a story. I love it. So yeah, my background for anyone listening, I write for Farming Monthly National Magazine. I'm a freelance journalist, and I write a blog for Farmers Guardian, and have my own Substack series where you can find sort of elements of this conversation throughout that. But I love this podcast because I recently wrote a story called "A Child is the Land," looking at the child as an ecosystem. And really, that's probably what personifies all of my work. I've previously done radio presenting, and worked, if anyone knows, on the film documentary 6 Inches of Soil, which has had profound sort of, I can't think of the word, I've just gone.
Impact.
Thank you. Profound impact globally, and really opening up these conversations about rewilding ourselves, our land, but regeneration. So for me, I'm working on regenerating education currently. I'm the founder of Soil Ed, a campaign to get food, farming, and sustainability embedded across all subjects in the national curriculum, which is where really I met Daphne. Lucky me came across the lovely Daphne. And honestly, I'm blown away with her expertise. It's again seeing things from a different angle, different perspective, and it just really keeps that rabbit hole open continuously. I'm going down it and taking everything through policy, which is fun to say the least. But I think it's, we all have this responsibility not just to be custodians of the land and the younger generation, but for me, it's that sense of shared responsibility and challenging, um, for me, in my case, policy in Westminster, and having that authority that give yourself the authority to challenge something, um, and question, and call people out because we only are here for such a short time, and it all comes back to, for me, reconnecting everything. Um, so yeah, I mean, our bodies, our communities, everyone in it, and I'm really looking forward to continuing this conversation in how we all shape each other and how the land shapes us. So yeah, I'm really excited. I've got a big background in sustainability. I was um, in education, so obviously I have a broad knowledge of that. Recently, as an industry expert, been contributing to the new agricultural T level qualification, which is super exciting, and it's been an absolute privilege. And for the last 12 years, I've been farming with livestock. And for that, I've been recognised as the inaugural sustainability champion at the House of Commons. So, yeah, recently I was a finalist for Agent of Change, which is a big global platform. So I'm really excited to bring my expertise to this.
We're excited to have it. Thank you for being here. Daphne.
Yeah, I mean, how do I follow all of this? Um, where do we even begin? I think that some themes have been, yeah, food and policy. Um, I came from Canada many years ago to the UK because I was offered the opportunity to do a PhD in food policy, and that was my golden ticket to a beautiful new life. And I worked my tail off to get here, and it has just been the most amazing adventure ever since. Um, in the process of doing my PhD research, which was very much focused on how communities develop approaches to food system sustainability through local food production. How does local food production tick the boxes for building community, a better food economy, more, ecological sustainability and resilience? And who are the players in those spaces? How do they hash it out and get something that works for that community that's really like bespoke to that place? And while I was doing all the research on the food system and realizing just how we could argue broken the food system is, or you could say that it's working exactly as it's been designed to work, I just thought, oh my goodness, I am so uncomfortable living in a city because in an urban space, you have 3 days worth of food if crisis hits. And as you sort of open up that, you called it Pandora's box or can of worms. I'm going to call it Pandora's can of worms. Love it. Um, I just got this sense of like, oh, something's not right here. And I felt, most people feel really comfortable in cities. I am a country kid. I felt really vulnerable in an urban space. And the more I learned, the more uncomfortable I got. And then was sitting around at a conference one day where we had all of these academic policy people talking about what changes we needed to make in farming policy for farmers to enact. And I looked around and there wasn't a farmer in sight. There was not a single farmer's voice present to share what the reality was for them. And I thought, ooh, that's a big old gap. So involves dogs. Um, it was very much in the biggest little farm kind of approach. I had come from Canada with a dog, and when I moved to the UK, I met a boy, and we decided to get a dog, and so we got this big German Shepherd who was just not meant to be an urban dog. So we had these two big dogs, a Husky Lab from Canada and this big German Shepherd in a terrace flat in Islington. And then we went, oh no, we have to buy a farm. We need to get these boys a farm. So we decided to do that and started a market garden. And the idea being, in a sense, well, we can be more self-sufficient ourselves, but it was actually kind of a trial of my PhD research on the ground, very much on the ground. And how can we produce food for our community, build links with that community, hopefully make a living. We didn't. And then and and then build a diverse, ecologically thriving space. So we tick the boxes on 2 out of 3 metrics. We went through the pandemic as food producers, which you can imagine was trial by fire. I mean, in 2019, we were doing 12 veg boxes. In 2020, we ramped up to 55 veg boxes coming off of our like less than 1 acre plot that we were growing on. And that was from the academic angle to the land angle. And now I'm at all of these different spaces. I'm on my land, I'm producing food, I'm growing seed, but now with more of a focus on community food resilience and how we can upskill and connect with one another in the land to build the resilience back into our community food system, because shifting the juggernaut of the national food system or the global food system. Olivia, I'll leave it to you, because my work is grassroots. And as much as I, spend time working in those spaces, I think grassroots change is where my heart is. And having my farm being a space where I can invite people so we can learn and forge those connections and that understanding together is super important to me. But I also run our county food partnership. So hitting it at the sort of micro level, but then branching out to community and then the county level. Gives me a chance to connect the dots across our county's food system, talk about our county's food economy, get to know so many people doing amazing things, work on local level food strategies so that maybe communities can understand how they would respond to crisis, and sort of do asset mapping, gaps mapping, and figure out how they would mobilize. So yeah, we're sort of looking at the policy stuff up here, and Olivia, you and I talk about education and the work that we're doing in Shropshire in schools. And we're working on civil food resilience and upskilling and how to get more local food on the plates of local people and research on, seed systems. And I lecture in that. So there are like lots of different ways that we've got to hit all of these different levels to make change. And when I talk about my work being in alignment all the way up, all of my levels are stacked on the same principles and the same values of skilling people up, resilience, regeneration, and reconnecting. So I guess coming back to the original question, what does rewilding ourselves and the world look like? I see it almost more as regenerating, because I think we need to connect with land. And maybe that's the wildness. Maybe we've been a little too sanitized and used to very conformist structures. And, this is how a lawn has to look. And this is how a person has to look. And this is how we all have to think. I think that we can shake off a lot of that. And I think regeneration and helps us reconnect with land and how to unpick and unlearn some of that very rigidly structured wiring that we've had for the last few generations. So hopefully by getting our fingers in the dirt a little bit, that can help.
Oh my God, this is just going to be so much fun, is all I can say. This is so good. Something that I am hearing as a thread through all of our work as well that I would like to unpick with you guys and get your thoughts on this too, is the issue of agency and becoming one's own advocate. And what does that look like? For me in particular, the way that it plays out as an example, obviously I'm working with dogs, but really I'm working with the people. They're people, right? And it's about that's where shifts start to happen. And I find that even though somebody might be coming to me because they have a dog with kidney disease, for example, and they need a tailored diet to that, that's just one component of what's happening in the work that we do together. And so much of what I'm actually supporting them with and encouraging them with is about reclaiming their own agency. And I would even argue that this touches on the kind of question of what is wildness. And almost in that way that Clarissa Pinkola Estes talks about wildness in her book, Women Who Run with the Wolves, and how, if you're not familiar with that book, she describes from her own research and her own kind of cultural traditions of looking at the ways in which the way we've treated wolves and the way that we've treated women parallel one another, and how there is this fear of what each of them can do and a lot of misunderstandings. And I think I see running through most of the people who come to me are women who have taken on this kind of role in relationship with their dogs, that the dog and the situations that the dogs are putting them in, whether that be a health challenge or a behavioral challenge, is such an invitation for them to reconnect with themselves, to find their own voices on behalf of their dogs at first, but it's that opening of the door that they can start to do it for themselves. And I see that as so powerful and so necessary right now in terms of both the work that you're doing, Daphne, at a kind of grassroots level. How are we helping that individual? And Olivia, translating that up as well to the kind of policy level. How are we finding our agency? How are we supporting one another and becoming advocates for ourselves and the world that we want to see? So I just wanted to kind of float that out there and hear your thoughts on it.
Can I jump in? Are you pointing at me? Ace. Okay, cool. Oh, I have so much to say. In the activist space and in the pushing change-making agendas space, I see a whole bunch of really exceptional women doing this work. And it is such an incredible example of, Olivia, when you used words like circularity and talking about the child is the land. And the whole concept of matriarchy isn't hierarchical, is it? It's a circle that positions children and the vulnerable, and I'll include land in the vulnerable, in that circle. And we, as women in these spaces and activists in these spaces, community-led engagement, organizing, gathering, all the way up to national and global levels. What a powerful force is emerging. And with such a history of being being undermined and silenced, and to be hitting, I'll say hitting an age personally, but hitting an age, a time in history where we're effing fed up. I think we're tired of being quiet, right? So agency is really coming to the fore, and not, you know, oh, sorry, I don't want to rock the boat agency, like forceful taking up space agency, where there are all of these socialized pressures that have come from societal systemic structures. And they are created, they are false. And to be at a point, I think, where a lot of people and a lot of women are going, you know what? unsubscribe. No, I'm going to be a goddamn nuisance. Um, and it's really quite liberating. And we are getting a heck of a lot done. And we are bringing people together in an age of division, which is it's healing work, it's energy worker work, and it's something that is so deeply embedded in matrilineal relationships and societies that we can bring that to this time. Um, so when there are really significant forces that are trying to divide, there is so much that we can do in communities and in education just by creating spaces, whatever form of spaces. So when I think about agency, I think of just the work that is going on and that is incredibly hopeful that I see every day in the food systems landscape. I mean, as a food partnership, I am one of me and my team, Shropshire, are one of 123 food partnerships working across the UK to really push place-based food systems change. And there's a lot of community engagement in that. There's also a lot of policy work in that. But it's weaving networks, it's connecting people, and there are some exceptions, but it's predominantly women-led as a network and as a movement. So I see that circle, building that circle and the circularity and the systems thinking and the links and the weaving that structure is bringing in. That's my 2 cents.
I love that. And I will happily rock the boat and become a nuisance because I'm only now getting started, really. I was watching the news this morning, and quite interestingly, the skills minister was on there, and she was asked by the BBC presenter, sort of about the boys' club going on in Parliament currently and the narrative that shapes everything. Would it be different if we had more women in there? And would there be the problems that's occurring in the news every day at the moment? And she just couldn't really answer it, and I don't know what you girls think, but for me, I think obviously women are just. I'm not a feminist by any means, but I think we know we have a natural nurturing kind of instinct in us, and for me, and I think I could answer for a lot of women, I think coming back to something Daphne just said, at grassroots level, we don't have anything to lose. So why not go all in and cause a fuss and make some noise and challenge the status quo? And it's actually so empowering. And I think, for so long, even going back to the land army, women are the responsible custodians, and they want to teach, they want to nourish, they want to protect. So they've always had agency. It's just it's not always been recognized for me. And our going back to our ancestors, they're just, women have always been seen and not heard. And I think that age that Daphne was talking about, it's arrived. For me, I would say it's definitely arrived. And I think it's now up to us to really shape that for the younger generation, is to give them space, to give them confidence, to give them knowledge, to then carry on our work and carry on these wonderful conversations. So I think it's an exciting time coming up. Um, Going back to the question about rewilding, for me, rewilding is all about literacy. It is about knowledge, and how can we do best with that? And like Daphne's doing really fantastic work at grassroots level in her community, and that has that ripple effect, doesn't it? And although we're at opposite ends, um, we align so perfectly well. Um, by Daphne's work, she can contribute to what I take further up the chain. And there's that evidence, that's that impact, that demonstration that it works. Um, so, yeah, I don't know what you guys think about that.
I think there's the storytelling aspect for sure. I mean,
Yeah.
what we have to do is show the radical alternative possible, and not alternative in like a, you know, in a scary way. I think people have really been had it drilled into them that alternative is like, ooh, really too subversive. And I think equally, Olivia just saying, I'm not a feminist. I think people have had it drilled into them that it's somehow a bad thing, rather than
Mm,
this concept of it's just this radical idea that women are equal. It doesn't have to be more complex or heavy-handed than that. Um, but yeah, I think showing this radical optimism through small scale initiatives and connection. Um, it's the beautiful little examples that we can then say, but have you seen? And have you seen this? Like they can do it there. And it links into just taking the system that we are used to seeing, that we have just sort of been given as this is the only way that things can be. This is the way it's always been done, but it's not. And I think that we can subvert things because we can look at things sideways or turn them over and look at them in different ways. Um, and I see the work that I'm doing at the farm as a way to gently bring people into different ways of thinking. And that might be maybe we don't have to make a sort of a capitalistic extractive income from other people, for our own personal benefit. What if at the end of the year we're just good? We're like net zero income. We've been all right, but we have shared a lot and we have uplifted more people. What if we have lots of micro enterprises and community members having small businesses that utilize stuff on our property? It's shifting the idea of sharing and openness and redesigning for people. The world being centered around people, not profit. Um, yeah, I may have gone off piece there, but just the idea of we can show different ways of doing and have it not be scary because it's storytelling.
Absolutely. I want to jump onto that because I think it's really important to tie some of the things that you and Olivia were just saying as well. I think that we forget that things like capitalism and patriarchy, even democracy, they're
Mhm.
experiments. They're just experiments. And sometimes experiments work and sometimes they don't. But when you start to look at it as an experiment rather than a capital T truth that has always existed and must always exist, it creates a space of opening, well, to imagine, well, what could things look like in a different way? What do we want? And it reminds me of when I was doing the place-based work within my PhD, a lot of it was looking at food systems as well in light of climate change and in light of climate migration and the role of culture in food. One of the things that really crept up for me in terms of how do we address these big, wicked problems that don't have one solution, and I think that's important to remember as well. There isn't one solution that we're kind of searching in the dark for. There are many, many different ways of approaching it, and anything we do is going to create a domino effect. And it's sort of deciding what is the best version of that. But the kind of dominant question for me was a bigger question about our value systems and how we see ourselves and the role of the human, because that underpins the decisions that we make, the behaviors that we enact, what we're driving for. So our goal is going back to what you were saying, Daphne. Like, if our value system is profit based, then everything that we do, all the decisions that we are making, are going to be underpinned by how do we get profit. But if that's not a value system, your decisions are different and your behaviors are different. And that ultimately impacts things like climate change. But I think as well, this is where I'm going to bring the dogs to the table. When we are designing everything strictly from a human-centered perspective, I think that's also part of what is problematic in seeing ourselves as disconnected from nature. And it brings up that question, going back to the term rewilding. What is wild? What does that actually mean? And I think asking those sort of fundamental questions can shed a lot of light on some of the values that we hold that maybe we're not even that conscious of. They're so ingrained in us that we don't even recognize, wait a second, that's a value. It's not necessarily a capital T truth. And what with this term, with the prefix of what does that then mean to either go back to or to bring forward again a concept of wildness? So I just wanted to kind of provoke that and see what you guys think about that, and how is that something that we may or may not need to kind of take into consideration as we're thinking about these big things.
Olivia, do you have thoughts? I feel like I've talked a lot.
I do. I have thoughts. I'm just trying to process them in my mind that they come out as some sort of sensible narrative for the listeners. I don't, when we talk about, for me, rewilding isn't an escape. It's, I think a lot of people think, oh, we're escaping what we're in now, and we've got to kind of get as far away as possible from it. It's not fantasy, it's not purity. Um, it's remembering our participation in all our actions. It's about learning how how to belong where you already are, and the bones of which um essentially hold us up. You know, I just, stories dissolve over the years, and I just think if we say wild, it's remembering our place where we were. And you're right, we got so, I think, conditioned, and society has shaped us to be so robotic that we almost have learned not to think, not tell the truth. And I think all this just reminds us that we are always in exchange. So I don't know, Daphne, shed some light.
The big one. Um,
Big one.
I I tend to have this sort of association with rewilding in this sort of, the NEPA states, introduce wolves, introduce beavers, and just kind of let things go, which I know is absolutely simplistic. And I think that's the issue that a lot of people have when they have heard a term repeated in a certain context. And now we're getting the same, well, we've had the same thing with sustainability for a very long time. And now we're getting the same thing with regenerative. And what we're forgetting, I think, is the root of regenerating. So to bring something back to health. So there's, to me, a massive element of reconnection, remembering that we are absolutely part of nature, and that land is life, soil is life, seeds are life, water is life. And our knowledge of that, and not us being outside of that, is essential. And I think we have struggled under structures that have separated us from that. we don't know how to cook, we don't know how to grow. If the grocery stores were empty tomorrow, people would starve. Um, I think that creeping baseline syndrome where people don't understand what is in their backyard because they don't go in their backyard. We live in sterile boxes and we don't engage with the land, with nature, with one another. I think we have, as is exemplified by so much of our geopolitical stuff right now, we've lost connection to one another and empathy for one another as human beings. We've lost our collective humanity, I think, in many ways. And by coming together to celebrate diversity of all kinds, diversity of natural systems, diversity of land, diversity of gender, diversity of ways of being human and part of nature. I think by bringing diversity back to normal, I mean, the world does not do monocultures. It doesn't do straight lines. There is no one shape and size of tree or one format of lake. That's only for people that we expect that. We expect people to be one thing or another thing, but never the in between. Um, and all of a sudden it's weird. It's prepper to be self-sufficient when it's what was the norm, 75 years ago. And I think for me, I'm a collector of skills. I love learning something new and folding it into myself. And that's, in a sense, it's a time machine because that is really sacred, you know, tested and true knowledge that has kept us in good stead for thousands of years and generations. Um, but is also a vehicle into the future because I can be a teacher of those skills to others and, be the witch on the hill in my village and gather around children, let's learn together. So it's rewilding, it's regenerating, it's reconnecting, it's resilience. And to me, my buzzword is resilient. We just have to um, fold these things back into ourselves with deep remembering and in, as you put it, Olivia, in relationship, in exchange with the land, not extraction and not transactional. Yeah.
Yeah, because humans are not separate from ecosystems, right? So every body, every breath is formed by soil, water, air, and place. And, our senses, our habits, our metabolism, imagination all emerge from the land. And what you say is we are nature itself. And the land is not passive. It shapes how we move, how we respond, how we care. And I just going back to my previous example of like the Women's Land Army and everything, it's I think women shaping the land they have this attention that matters. They have many care multiples. Rewilding ourselves is remembering that participation and really going back to that for me. This knowledge isn't written down anywhere. It just lives in our hands. It's in rhythm. It's in muscle memory. And I just think that's a really powerful kind of space to own.
Absolutely. It lives in our bones. And across cultures, we talk about that. There's often that kind of metaphor of feeling something in your bones. And I think it's important to both remember and to honor that. And I think one of the biggest skills that we're probably being called to call upon to reconnect with is actually touching back into our own intuition, into our own knowing. And consequently, stop. This goes back to the agency. Stop giving our power away to anything and everything else. There is this real call back inwards in order to assess what is right. And I think that's part of the unlearning process that we're all in, because as you've both said, I mean, we have been indoctrinated, we have been cultured to think and feel in certain ways. And this is such a ripe time in history where we're seeing, as we're recording this, we are currently seeing the fall of systems of patriarchy. The veil has been lifted from our eyes about what has been going on that we sort of knew about, but now it's like really presently there to question as this comes down. What do we want to rebuild and see ourselves as that builder? Like that, I think it's part of an identity shift that I've mentioned to you guys before in our private conversations of I went to a conference, this is like now almost 10 years ago, that the Basque Culinary Center in San Sebastian, Spain, was hosting around revisioning the future of the restaurant system and how that was connected to wider food systems and how it could proactively play a role. And researchers from all over the world were brought researching all different kinds of things. But something that really stood out to me with my interest in participation was a project that MIT was looking at with creating these little like almost like terrariums that would create microcultures for growing like tomatoes or little things you could grow on your windowsill, with the idea of growing these plants at the ideal with the ideal like temperature and moisture and everything that would boost nutrient impact. But take that part of it away. What was most impactful for me was the culture shift underlying that, which was about changing the identity of who is considered a farmer. And when you start to see yourself in your Brooklyn apartment growing a tomato plant, you see that as being a farmer. How that then reconnects to the question of agency, reconnects to this idea of rewilding, and starts to place the power of rebuilding systems in the hands of each and every one of us. So, how do we envision what replaces what's falling apart? That's just what came up for me.
I have deeply felt as talking about the calling, what is our work to do? What's the big work, capital letters? Um, and I see my role as somebody who has space, who has land, who has education and the privilege to connect with people. I have seen my role very much in as a midwife to bringing forth a new way of looking at things and doing things, gathering people, sort of a doula into the next iteration of the world that we want to create. Amanda Scott calls it through utopianism, which I love. Um, Part of that has been deeply the calling to save seeds. As a food systems researcher and talking about civil food resilience, people look at food, but they forget about seed, the fundamental reproductive material that underpins our entire food system. It's like atoms. Nobody sees them, nobody thinks about them, but they're there and they hold everything together. That's what seeds do. Um, and by showing people, and that farmer in their Brooklyn apartment, Vandana Shiva says everybody who grows anything is a farmer. And I love that ownership, that sense of bringing people together, not that divisive, you're only a farmer if you do it this way, or you're only a farmer if you do it that way, but somebody who is a grower, a steward, someone who is nurturing. That is the whole idea of the midwife helping go from one stage to the next. It's guidance, it's creating spaces and safety and security. And it takes a whole lot of putting yourself out there and agency and being brave enough to, I think, accept the calling. And I think maybe that's a big theme of what we're seeing in the States, in across the world in people's response to the far right and the multiple overlapping threats that are bringing down democracy or trying to bring down democracy. Let's be optimistic. But people finding their courage in a point of, oh my goodness, we have been held in a very, very comfortable space. And we have been very, very used to that, very accustomed to it, to the point where it has taken a hell of a lot to get people to actually respond and react, call a spade, and understand what's going on. But people are responding to that in the most remarkable and hopeful ways. And they are midwives in their own way. They are holding those spaces and those circles of mutual support. So everybody has their own tools in their toolkit, right? For me, it's land and seeds. And that is the sort of the fundamental reproductive material, soil and seeds that I can use to bring people into the next space. Can I ask people, can I ask listeners maybe what their tools are in their toolkit as their sort of how to reproduce these ways of connecting and to bring people together to create a more resilient and regenerative and rewilding space. I'll drop that one.
I love that. For me, I guess my tool is just through storytelling. I love connecting the dots, whether that's bringing people into different voices and different industry experts into one room, or being able to frame that in different scenarios for people that they understand and that they are drawn in. And I am enjoying the process of this, not only through campaigning for soil ed and education, but with writing my own upcoming book. It's how things have shaped me, but it's always about connection. So whether it's connection to weather, whether it's connection to the land, whether it's connection to animals, ancestry, folklore, I'm so layered. But I literally my daily life is through all of that. Is I'm like a walking, living almanac, and my it's very much frames my storytelling. So in terms of policy, I can connect the grassroots to the academia and then draw it up to policy. And I just, with all the conversations, it's like how soil, water, biodiversity, they all connect. So I'm definitely that connecting dot. I wouldn't say particularly brave. I just think a job needs to get done and let's just do it, okay? I have a voice, as we all do, and let's use it. And I think it here is where we really, at grassroots level, need to empower the young to not feel like they're particularly doing anything special, but allowing them the time, allowing their voices to be heard. And really, I think that's the best gift any adult can give them. It's just time and space. Let them feel, let them explore, let their senses be wild. And yeah, I don't know. It's quite simple for me. I think we as a nation overthink so much, and it can all be very, very simplified. When we're paying thousands and thousands of pounds in policy to have a report and a white paper, when actually it's the answers are there, you're just not listening.
Mm-hmm.
I can just, push those voices, push those reports, push those findings, through. You're both examples of that, where you've done extraordinary work. You've both got PhDs, and for the listeners, I haven't, and I don't care. But it's allowing that void to push through the barriers that have been shaped by systems above us. And I know we talk about food systems, but I really hate that word system, because I think, we're almost channeling that word to a negative kind of point again. And I just hate the word system, because I do not want to be known as a system or be part of it in any way. I am me, and I am wild, and I'll go off in different tangents, and that's okay.
Are you an ecosystem then?
I am an ecosystem.
We're all ecosystems. So
Yeah.
it's food. If we want to recenter the conversation about what real food is, we need to be working from a food ecosystem, not a food econ system. I like that. I like that very much. So I think we've got what? The midwife. We've got the storyteller and the weaver in Olivia, and the energy worker in Alexia. Alexia, what are your thoughts?
I like that, but I also I kind of want to refuse that identity as well, because I feel like we believe that energy workers are separate gifted people, and my whole thing in working with energy is reminding everyone we are all energy workers. We are all energy. We can all do this. And I think that's really important at this point in time to that's part of that reclamation of our own power. And so that's, I mean, I take on board what you said, but I want to put that out there so that listeners see that themselves in that too. It's not about, I think we're sort of done with the era, or we're becoming done with the era of going to someone else to do energy work on us because we're not capable. They're special. And in reality, with this, the beautiful downfall of everything is this reminder that we are all energy and we are all working with it all the time. And even as somebody who is a trained Reiki master, we we are Reiki. We are universal life force energy. You can't not be. And we have, going back to our wildness as well. We know the magic of when we were children and we fell and we scraped our knees, and our mums coming over and blowing on our knees or putting their hands on our knees to make us feel better. Let me kiss it better. That is energy work in motion. So I just put that out there as a soft reminder that we are all doing it. But I think drawing upon my arts background, I'm a massive advocate for art education and also helping everyone to remind themselves that everyone is an artist. But what the arts ask us to do that I think is so incredibly important, and the humanities generally, but I'm going to focus on the arts, they help us to ask different and better questions. And I think right now, that is what is underpinning everything. We are finding solutions based upon the questions that we're asking. So if we ask different questions, we will come up with different answers. And I think the skill of asking questions has been drilled out of us, to be honest, when we're sort of forced to conform. And I think in terms of the wider discussion of like the arts and humanities and the role that they play in a society that is so focused on materialism, and again, going back to the sort of relatively new history of the way that we see the world, even our reliance upon the forms of science, our material science, is new. We used to have a much more expansive understanding of what that meant. And there was actually a direct correlation between art and science. They weren't taught separately. And I think what the arts and humanities offer as a counterpart to the sciences is the sciences might say, we can do this. And the arts and humanities say, but should we? And I think that's really important as we're at this crossroads and as we are building the new, asking better questions about what it is we want to see. How do we see ourselves as stewards? How do we ask questions that are reflective of and encompassing the benefit of every other living creature, including Gaia herself? I think for too long we have focused on man, and now we're being called, like it or not, to focus in other places and be much more inclusive. And this is where I think the kind of divine feminine energy is coming back in, to go right back to the beginning, Olivia, with what you were sharing in terms of circularity and in terms of the ways that, Daphne, you were sharing too, like women traditionally are collaborative in nature and nurturing. And I'm using woman. I just want to kind of make a clarification with that too, in terms of the terminologies around gender. Historically, we've assigned it to women, but I'm talking more about like feminine, traditionally feminine roles. And I want to be inclusive of like non-binary context, and recognizing too, we are all white women who are having this conversation. So we are aware of that and trying to open the doors as well for other conversations to come in. But in terms of the way that the matriarchal societies historically have been much more inclusive and much more nurturing, and also having this idea of like not just acting for now, but being a good ancestor 7 generations from now. Those to me are the kinds of questions that we need to be asking right now. So I would say, yes, energy worker would describe part of what it is I do, but I would say artist as well, and asking those questions. And I think that's something that's important.
And I think everybody has something that they're going to be able to bring to the table. Um, and the land and relationships. Um, I think we have so deeply had it impressed upon us that you're just one person, you can't do anything, you won't achieve anything. Um, but in my life and my experience, I have found that to not be true. And it's one of the really convenient, really reductionist narratives that gets trotted out to keep systems in power in continuation. And I think we have to remember that everything that we have been socialized to and internalized, if we stop and asking those questions, being the artist and being the provocateur,
Provocateur.
provocateur, there we are. And asking those questions, who does this behavior serve? And what systems does this perpetuate? I think is a really valuable way to get people to stop and not take it for granted that, well, it's a big capital T truth. I like that. That's a good one. But instead, well, this little seed was planted in my brain at some point and it took root, but is it something that still serves me? Is it something that I want to keep? Or, is this something that I deeply believe in that I have to nurture and keep going? So we will all have our identities, and not just a singular identity. I sort of said that facetiously, this assignment of of titles, but we all have so many hats and such a diversity of life experience and skills and knowledge and so many different things that we are bringing into all of the diverse spaces that we work in. Um, and I think we all have our superpowers, and everybody, all the listeners, um, and everybody who is doing any sort of connection work or just the choices that they're making will be having an impact and an influence. And so we can have cascading positive influences, or we can have the opposite. I think that's a really valuable choice. So, yeah, again, I welcome people to think about what their superpowers are and what tools they have in their toolkit, um, so that we can use those tools together, and maybe other people bringing other tools and other people bringing their tools, and build something through that.
What's your superpower? I love that. We
Great.
do all have, we are, we know, we are all incredible. We do all have a nice power. I really like that. It's going to be the title for the Substack, I think.
And
What's your superpower?
how you can show up for other people.
Yeah.
It's a complete reversal of expectation. When you walk into a meeting or when you walk into a room, everybody thinks you're there to get something. But if you flip that and say, okay, well, how can I show up best for you? A friend of mine has taught me this. And if you put yourself in service to the mission, and even if it's just in a small way, it shows people that you believe in what they're doing and that you're there to help them, not in an extractive way, but in support, that you can be somebody who is giving of your time, your energy, and your superpowers and tools to something bigger. That's, in my experience, has been this unlocking mechanism to relationships in the last year. Just, sure, how can I show up for you? So that's communities, that's people, that's individuals, it's, yeah, superpowers.
I would like to throw something into the mix, a little task, as you would say to the listeners. So we're talking about us as ecosystems and how we can wild ourselves and connect and all these wonderful words. And, you know, it's planting season as we speak. Those first tender steps into the garden are livening up. And you know, it's literally and metaphorically it's plant season. We're coming out of wintering ourselves. So what does that look like? So how do we, I want to ask how we honor that inheritance to our listeners and you too, of course. I'd like to hear how we honor that inheritance. How do we let embodied knowledge guide our choices? Every touch of the soil is a continuation. Every act of care carries a memory forward. So, what does that look like to you?
I love it. So I would invite listeners to reflect on this and then get in touch with us. You can reach out to us on Instagram. I'll leave all the links in the show notes, but we'd love to hear your thoughts on this episode, your thoughts on these particular topics, and what kinds of actions you are taking in terms of the seeds that you are planting. Ladies, is there anything else we want to leave listeners with? Anything that we didn't touch on today that you feel is really important?
I think let's leave them wanting more. I mean,
Yeah.
there's so much we can cover in the next one, but maybe we can give our answers to Olivia's excellent question as the start to the next one and how we've pondered that.
Mm. Next one, I would like listeners to just think about the food that they eat, what's on their plate, and how do you honor that, and how do you celebrate that, and just take a moment to reflect. So that will come next. But yeah, I'm really, really excited to hear from listeners, and it's been such a joy bringing all this into one conversation. I knew we would rock, but it's such an interesting void. I think that it's these conversations are not happening as they should. We I think people are almost silo in conversations, and it is again that connectedness between all these narratives that really need to be taken place.
Absolutely. And I'm going to add, Olivia, to what you said about thinking about the food on our plates, thinking about the food in our dogs' bowls as well. Start opening up that conversation.
Yes, I would love that. Let's do that next time.
Sounds great. Thank you both of you, and thank you everyone for listening. And we'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for joining Daphne Ducrot, Olivia Shave, and me, Alexia Meller, for this first episode of Seeds and Bones. As we come to the end of this conversation, we'd love to leave you with a moment to pause and reflect. What stayed with you? What stirred something in you? A question, a memory, an idea, a shift in perspective? And what might that look like in your life from here? Maybe it's something small, a different choice, a new awareness, a conversation you feel called to have, or a seed, literal or metaphorical, that you're ready to plant. We would truly love to hear from you, your reflections, your questions, and your key takeaways. You can find us on Instagram at Seeds and Bones Podcast. We'll leave all the details in the show notes. This is a shared space, and these conversations don't end here. They continue through you, through what you notice, what you choose, and what you carry forward. Our next episode will arrive at Beltane as this season turns again, and the energy of growth, connection, and vitality begins to rise. Until then, take care of yourselves, each other, and the land that holds us all. We'll see you next time.